Brian Bouffard is a criminal defense lawyer. He's a former U.S. Navy JAG lieutenant commander. He defends military members in court-martial cases throughout the United States and around the globe. He's a recognized expert in military justice, and he is joining us right now on the Ron Owens program. Brian, Commander, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Pat, good morning. Thank you for having me.
You betcha. Now, he's being returned to active duty today. So first of all, can you just tell us what the normal reintegration process of any former POW is?
I can, and this is a development that's really not much of a development at all. This is just, in my view, an indication that his reintegration process is going well. Since he's been brought back to the States, or actually since they got him to the hospital in Germany, he has been undergoing that process with physicians and mental health folks and people who are trying to reintegrate him into, regular society. And that's a process that just is going to take as long as it takes.
Right.
It's really different for everybody. But to me, this is an indication that process is still going well. He's past the part where he needs to be an inpatient and can perform some regular duties. Now, that does not mean that they're going to give him a rifle and put him in a deployment cycle and send him out. I think he will probably never leave the country again.
Yeah. Why? You mean as a military person, as a soldier?
Well, certainly not as a soldier, I don't think, and even, it'd be interesting to see once he becomes a citizen and leaves the military, if he ever tried to apply for a passport to go anywhere. I bet that he would get a little bit of scrutiny, at least from Homeland Security.
Okay. He was Private Bergdahl on his capture. How did he become Sergeant Bergdahl?
That is also just a very routine matter. He was held by the enemy, and he received the same promotions that people in his peer group received. So it's purely based on the fact that he was technically in a duty status, although a detainee from the enemy, but they basically promoted him on the regular cycle everybody else would be. So
it's just time in service. He was in that rank for a certain period of time, and so then he was promoted, right?
Exactly. Very routine, and nobody should read anything into that about the character of that service.
Okay, but I have to take a break here. When we come back, I want to ask specifically about the allegations of desertion. I know the investigation continues, and I want you to talk a bit about him being restored to active duty, if that indicates anything about how the investigation is likely going. We'll talk about that when we come back. I also want to open up our phone lines to our listeners. The telephone number is 808-0810, 80-80-810. We're speaking with Lieutenant Commander Brian Bouffard. He's a criminal defense lawyer. He's a former U.S. Navy JAG lieutenant commander, and he does defend military members in court-martial proceedings around the globe. He's an expert in military justice. 808-0810 is our telephone number. I'm Pat Thurston in for Ron Owens, and you're listening to KGO. Good morning, I'm Pat Thurston. I'm in for Ron Owens today. My guest is Commander Brian Bouffard. We're talking about the case of Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. He has now been returned to active duty. Today he assumed an active duty post. The investigation of the allegations of desertion are continuing. And Brian is with us because he is a criminal defense lawyer and former U.S. Navy JAG lieutenant commander. He does defend military members in court-martial cases. This is a guy who actually knows the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and not everybody does. So it's kind of important when we're talking about these cases. So, Commander, first of all, I want to know about the allegations of desertion, and there's a couple ways I want to go here. One is the allegations we heard came from members of his troop. He has previously walked away from his duty post. What's the difference between AWOL and desertion, and why was the accusation of desertion?
The difference between AWOL and desertion is that desertion requires that the government prove one extra element. In other words, if you're supposed to be somewhere and you don't show up to a formation, or you leave the barracks when you're not supposed to, you're AWOL, you're unauthorized absent. If you had the intent in your own mind to remain away permanently, that is, never come back, and the government can prove that, then you've committed the greater offense of desertion.
And what are the potential penalties for each of those violations?
Well, it may sound odd, but for desertion in time of war, which this would be considered a time of war under the law, if they can prove desertion, he is legally subject to the widest possible range of punishment known to the law, and that is everything from no punishment up to, no kidding, the death penalty.
Wow.
Now, realistically, is he gonna face the death penalty for this? No, but it is legally possible.
Why such a broad range of punishments?
Well, because primarily you have certain offenses like desertion, misbehavior before the enemy, aiding the enemy, things like that, that really can only, or certain of them can only occur in wartime. And because of just the nature of war, the nature of needing to protect our troops, the Congress has decided that potentially that behavior could be so bad as to warrant being executed.
Do you think there is a possibility, if the government cannot prove the desertion charges, that he will be charged as being AWOL?
I think that that's probably a pretty likely possibility.
And what penalty would he face then?
It depends on the way they charge it and certain allegations that they make. But realistically, I think that the way that this would go would be he would face trial, or he would face if he decided to plead guilty, he would face a sentencing hearing either way. But if he went to trial, he's convicted, he's facing a sentencing hearing. I think that anybody rationally would look at the fact that he was a prisoner of war in the hands of a very brutal enemy for 5 years. I think that his punishment certainly would probably include being kicked out of the military and loss of his rank, but it's difficult for me to imagine that they would look at him and say, you know what, we need to imprison you.
Right.
What you've done is so bad that you need to be in prison.
Yeah. How difficult is it for the government to prove that his intent was to leave and never come back? Especially since he's done this before and he's always returned.
Exactly. That would play into, if I'm defending the case, that's one of the things I point out. You know, this is probably not the best soldier in the world. He's not real good at following directions, but he's always, he's come back before. The best evidence of someone's intent is always out of their own mouth. If he decides to talk with the investigating officer or talk with law enforcement and say, yeah, when I left, I was upset and I just wanted to be away and never come back, well, boom, now they can use that against him and prove his intent. But even if he doesn't talk, the circumstances can often show somebody's intent. When he left, allegedly, he left his weapon behind. He left his body armor behind. He may have written emails indicating, a general dissatisfaction with being an American. And all those things you can kind of loop together, and a jury can consider whether or not they believe that the government has proved what his intent was.
Yeah. And of course, does it matter? Like, my understanding is his complaint about, when he made the comment about being an American, that he was ashamed to be an American, it had to do with a war crime, actually, I think, that he witnessed that members of his troop had committed, that they were running, well, maybe not a war crime, but they ran over children in a vehicle, an armored vehicle, and then they were making jokes and laughing about it afterwards. I guess that's not a war crime. Hey, I've got to take a break. Hang on with me, and let's talk a little bit more about all this when we come back. My guest is Brian Bouffard, and we're talking about the case of Bouffard Law. You can join us if you've got questions for him. He knows the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He will be able to answer them. 808-0810 is our number. I'm Pat Thurston. You're listening to KGO. Good morning, I'm Pat Thurston. We're talking about the case of Sergeant Bouffard Law. He is the accused deserter who was captured by the Taliban in Afghanistan. He was held in captivity for 5 years. Not that long ago, there was a trade made. He was traded for 5 Taliban prisoners. And there was a big brouhaha about all of this. He returned to active duty today, and on the line we have Commander Brian Bouffard. This is a guy who was a JAG lawyer, and he does work. He defends military people in court-martial proceedings. So I'm delighted again that you're here with us today, Brian. Let me. I kind of want to talk about a little bit more about Brian's case here first. Does he have legal counsel right now?
That's a great question. He certainly should, but it's often certainly not in the government's interest to give lawyers to people who they're trying to prosecute. So I would not be surprised if he hasn't seen a lawyer. I do know that when I first heard about this case, my first thought from a legal perspective is he needs a lawyer to start talking with the government about a grant of immunity, so that we can take this whole issue of prosecution off the table. And he can give them all the information that they want all day long.
Right.
But I doubt that that's been done, but I don't think we have any real hard evidence one way or the other on whether he's seen a lawyer at all.
So in the military, they don't have to provide you with a lawyer before they begin questioning you when they're investigating such a serious charge?
Well, if they're going to question him about circumstances related to his departure, they are going to have to let him know formally that they suspect him of an offense. They suspect him of either unauthorized absence or desertion or whatever it is that they think. And he will be advised that he has a right to an attorney, and they will try to persuade him to waive those rights, just like law enforcement does, every day in this country.
In civilian life.
But if he's smart, he'll talk to a lawyer before he talks to the investigating officer.
In addition to his prior behaviors, if you were representing him, what else would you use in his defense?
It's hard to say because there's so much evidence that I think is there that we just don't know.
Right.
And that's part of what they were doing in 2009 when they did the initial investigation, and that's what the current investigating officer is kind of trying to get to the bottom of now. But, certainly it does appear that based on what we've seen, Sergeant Bergdahl has at least committed the offense of unauthorized absence.
Right.
Whether or not it was a full-on desertion, we can't know that at this point. But it's really hard to say exactly what I would do without knowing exactly what the lay of the land is.
Yeah, you'd have to talk with him. So were you at all surprised over the issue of the trade for his release? I mean, isn't that just kind of a standard thing?
I told you what my first legal thought was.
Right.
My first thought, just as a citizen and as a former officer, is, wow, we've sent this potentially terrible message to our enemy that if you capture one of ours, you're going to get 5 of yours back. And so my initial concern was, I think that dynamic puts our troops over there at more risk.
Does it give the troops consolation, though, to know that we do not leave them behind?
I would hope so, and I think that that's the silver lining of this is, even if it's suspected that you've done something, criminal or at the very least really, really stupid, that we're still going to try and get you. And, that actually kind of complicates this case a little bit, too, because apparently we did send folks out looking for him, and some of those people were wounded, and some of those people lost their lives, and that's going to play into this as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, it has been a delight to talk with you, and I hope you'll join us on a future program. Thanks so much for being with us today, Commander.
Thank you, Pat. Take care.
You betcha. That, of course, is Commander Brian Bouffard, JAG officer in the Navy, and now he's a civilian, but he still represents military personnel in court-martial proceedings. 808810 is our telephone number. I'm Pat Thurston. You are listening to KGO.